It's been a while since I've done one of these, and I'm not even sure how to start this one, but I'm joined by Rhys Baker from over in the UK. Um, we're going to have a small little discussion on his views with abortion. He shortly after Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court, he had some spicy takes for a Christian on Twitter that caused an uprising in his Christian community. So we're going to have a little discussion about it. So, Rhys, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a teacher. I've been teaching for 12 years. I'm a biology teacher. I grew up as an atheist and spent quite a lot of time on atheist websites, being a vitriotic, horrible little man. Spent a lot of time in the bottom half of the internet, in those comment sections where things get really, really bad before Twitter really took off. I've got a degree in biology, particularly cancer biology and evolutionary biology. And I came to faith when my wife took me to church. JB is wrong. Okay. I have, as you've said, I've probably got some quite unorthodox views for some Christians. Everything I say has to be seen through the lens that I am a Brit. I grew up in a non-religious household. The UK is significantly more secular than vast parts of America. And nothing I'm trying to say is there to upset people. It's me trying to figure out where I sit. So I'm currently taking a degree from London School of Theology on biblical hermeneutics and interpretation of the Bible. And I like to think that I can be a bit nuanced in taking on other people's opinions. That was challenged. That was challenged after Roe v. Wade, and as you say, I set Twitter on fire a little bit, or at least my little section of Twitter set on fire. And that's not the Christian use of that phrase. That we weren't all hallelujah, praise God. I upset a lot of people. I upset a lot of people that I really respected, but I was trying to let people know where I thought this landmark decision landed.
And just for a quick basis, so you're from Britain. So what would your denomination be as far as your Christian goes? Would you be an Anglican or Catholic or some form of Protestant?
I describe myself as non-denominational Baptist. I attend a Baptist church, but that phrase is a very different. Baptist churches are very different in the UK compared to what is traditionally seen in the States. Things like the Southern Baptist Convention are very, very opposed to how the UK Baptists operate in a number of different ways. That we are more on the front foot on environmental issues, for example. And governance is much more grassroots level. There is no overarching hierarchy that sits on the top of it. So whilst I attend a Baptist church and I would call myself broadly evangelical, I'd also call myself broadly, I think you guys would call it liberal. I would say not conservative. So I do believe in the Holy Spirit. I do believe in the truth of Scripture. I don't believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, because it's been passed down over 2,000 years. We don't have access to the original monographs. And even if we did, we are fallen, fallible humans who struggle to interpret a document written just 200 years ago, the Constitution of the United States, for example. There's no way we're going to be able to handle something as complex and poetic and alien as the Bible. I have views that some would say are possibly heretical when it comes to things like marriage, when it comes to abortion, when it comes to how God works within the world. But within my church, I find people with the same views as me. So this is where the two cultures clash very, very stridently. I might say something that a Christian in the States would go, whoa, 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 that can't be allowed. And actually, I've talked it over with my pastor at my church, and that's come from a discussion that we've had from Scripture. So it is a very, very different ecumenical world over here.
So just touch bases, since you're since I've talked to Dean, London Theist.
Dean
He's
is
been
a
on my channel.
heretic. Dean is a
Yeah,
heretic. You should
yeah,
avoid
we
talking to
discussed
Dean.
that. Um, but so what are your views as far as like on eternal conscious torment and things of an afterlife? Just trying to lay the basis for
Ooh,
where
interesting.
we're headed. Since we are talking about what will basically come down to, in many people's eyes, as killing of a person.
Absolutely, and therefore the idea of what an afterlife is a natural part of that discussion. My views quite closely mirror Tim Keller's. You spend your entire life telling God, "My will be done," and at the end, he goes, "Okay." I think that hell is eternal separation from God. I think that it is best summed up in that phrase, hell is other people. And as a teacher, and I teach teenagers, hell is other people. It really is. But it also, hell is yourself. So I've had struggles with depression. I've had struggles with mental health. I've been very open about all of that. And the more insular and inward looking one becomes, the worse one's mental health becomes. And that is what I think hell is. You might start off just a little bit annoyed about something. And if this life is all we have, that's not really something we need to worry about. You might become a grumpy old man who sits on his front porch screaming at kids, but really it's nothing too bad. But I believe that we do have an eternity one way or the other. And that little nugget of nastiness over an eternity of inward looking can turn you into quite a horrific being. And I think that's what hell is. I don't see it as Dante's Inferno. I don't see it as hell and pitchforks. This is an idea that's come across from medieval artwork more than anything else. It's not people getting stabbed in the legs or burnt in fire. We've got this imagery within the Bible that has to be accepted as imagery. So we're talking about fire. That is talking about something that is all encompassing, all consuming. We can't take it as literal fire, just as we wouldn't take Genesis 1 as the earth being made from literal water. It's a symbolic image. So eternal conscious torment, I think if we take the biblical story of Lazarus and the rich man, where the rich man asks to be given a drop of water from Lazarus, and send messengers to my brothers so that they will know, send a dead man to my brothers that they will know. At no point in this does the rich man, because that's the only name we know him as, at no point does he ever ask to be removed from hell. He's still incredibly self-centered. He's still incredibly insular. He's still looking only at, oh, woe is me. And that's what I think hell is. It's being given over to one's own selfish desires for eternity, which is absolutely horrific. Let's not get away from that. This is not something that we would want to happen. This is not something we want to wish on anybody. I don't think it reduces the terror of hell, but equally, I don't think it's what you see in the movies. I don't think it's what's in the public consciousness of men in tights being stabbed with pitchforks.
So no Dante's Inferno.
No Dante's Inferno, not for me.
Okay. Oh man, I got so many ways I want to go with this. Let's just start with this. Let's just start with this one. So you put a tweet out on June 24th. It said, anyone who is celebrating this decision and the gun law from earlier in the week can unfollow me.
Mm-hmm.
We have nothing in common. I see Christianity as a religion that protects and raises up the weak. You don't. Hashtag bye. Do you stand by those words?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think necessarily I expressed myself particularly well, because the key word that I had in that was celebrating. There are people of honest conscience who do believe that decision, that Dobbs decision, was the right decision. And even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, God rest her soul, said that Roe v. Wade was a decision that was breathtaking in its scope. So there are good reasons to say why Dobbs is actually a reversal of law that was quite poor. But what I was seeing all over my Twitter feed was this triumphalism, and that wasn't Christian. Because what you've got to realize is that in these states with these trigger laws, and please remember that I'm coming at this from an outsider. I'm coming at this as a UK resident. In many ways, what right do I have to discuss American politics and American law? But
if I can interrupt you for a second there, I've found that lately online that it's mainly the people outside of America that understand American law better than most of the people in America.
oh, bless you, too kind.
The same way that a lot of people outside of Christianity understand it better than people that are in Christianity.
Yeah,
So
I'd agree with you there. But so what I was seeing was this triumphalism, and what we've got to realize is that with all of these states that have these trigger laws, the world changed overnight. The world changed at midnight, and a lot of people are going to be very, very frightened, very scared, very unsure of what comes next. And that's doctors, that's nurses, that's charity workers, that's women who have got themselves into impossible situations and now don't know what to do. And they are now very fearful for their future. I don't see Christianity as someone who is seeing these oppressed, poor, downtrodden people and celebrating that change in circumstance. I don't see that as Christianity. I don't want to be associated with that brand. Now, it's easy to dismiss as a no true Scotsman fallacy, but I read the Bible as a text of, particularly in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament as well, a text of love, a text of affirmation, a text of looking after the widow, the orphan, the poor, the resident alien. And what I was seeing was, hey, you're not going to get an abortion. Fantastic. Oh, you're going to have to deal with that. You're going to have to deal with your sex life now. And that was awful to me. Do I think that any Christian who holds that abortion is a sin, is the wrong way to go, should unfollow me? Absolutely not. No. I didn't express myself in that initial tweet, and I would probably double down on a few things that maybe were unwise in the heat of the moment. But I suppose my view was encapsulated by all of these tweets that went out with, okay, now the real work begins. And for me, that's backwards. That's completely backwards, because the real work should have been going on in the background since Roe v. Wade. If you want abortion to disappear, making abortion illegal will not make abortion disappear. Abortion was already decreasing before Roe v. Wade was brought in. What you need to do is bring in the culture, the climate, the atmosphere, the support that will dramatically reduce abortion, because it becomes unconscionable, it becomes unthinkable, rather than legislating, saying, this is what we're going to do, this is how we have to do it. And the naked hypocrisy from my perspective was that, on one hand, when the Supreme Court struck down New York, saying states don't get to decide on gun rights, and then the next week striking down Dobbs and saying states have to decide on abortion. Now, I know that is a gross oversimplification of the actual law, but the message that was sending out just seemed woefully hypocritical and uncaring. And when Christians then doubled down into that, I decided to light the tinderbox and see what happened.
What did you say, Stephen? I think he could have phrased it at least as celebration. Yeah, this is a great win for babies' lives. I think he meant more confrontation on both sides.
I think Stephen's onto something there. I think because we had
don't encourage him.
Look, Stephen's a great guy, JB. You've got to accept that eventually. You have to accept it eventually. The truth will out. Stephen's a great guy. I think we had this because I don't have the feed up. I've been tweeting a lot about climate change since England got on fire this week. But I think Stephen and I had
like fires and everything else over there.
It's apocalyptic. It's incredible. But he made that really good point when he said that this has been something that people have long since hoped for, prayed for, fought for. But so some people, their entire careers have been built around overturning this, and it's right for them to celebrate. And I take his point there. I take his point that for many, this was their life's work, that they are putting around an incredibly moral issue that cuts to the center of their being. And of course, they want to celebrate. But I suppose Stephen puts it quite nicely in there, this confrontational boasting, or as I said earlier, this triumphalism, this oh, fantastic, our way has won, na. It came across as incredibly immature, and it immediately ignored the human part of what, for these states with trigger laws, there's a lot of suffering that isn't going to go away just because abortion is now more restricted in these states, because we can't say it's illegal. It's more restricted in these states. Oh, well, I knew I'd be controversial today.
Well, I mean, you've already said you were a heretic. We already had
I took my best lessons from Dean. Dean's a heretic. I never said I wasn't.
So I guess here's where we're going to get into the meat of it. And I'm, like I said, like I told you, in the studio backstage before we came live, and as well as most of the people in my audience know, overall, I'm not a confrontational person. I've had people on my channel to have conversations with them to understand what they believe, why they believe it, and understand better their positions on things. So I don't try to get people on here to, because my thing is, if I'm going to argue against a position, I want to know what I'm arguing against. And I can't unless you have that dialogue with somebody to find out. Because, I mean, even from person to person, beliefs change, like inside denominations of a religion, but at least you get a better understanding of what a lot of the core principles are by having that discussion with somebody. So you said you didn't like the way that it was celebrated and handled. So let me ask you this. What are your overall views on abortion, period?
Abortions definitely come after periods.
Okay.
That's usually required. Number one, abortion is awful. Abortion is awful. It is a decision made by women who are in an incredibly difficult position one way or another. Now, we can argue till the cows come home about whether that woman gets herself into this position, whether there is a duty, therefore, to carry the consequences of their decision through. We can talk about exceptions to this with rape, with incest, with fetal abnormality. We can talk about all of this. But there was a sect online that suggested that women were using abortion as birth control, and that's just ridiculous. No abortion is joyful. No abortion is pleasant to go through, whether you're doing it at I think you call them Planned Parenthood in the States, or whether you're doing it at home. These things are deeply emotionally scarring, spiritually scarring, physically debilitating things. But from everything else that I say from here, that has to be kept in mind. Abortion is horrible. I don't go as far as saying abortion is always wrong. Note the always. There are a number of occasions where I say abortion is wrong, but abortion is not always wrong. I think that, and again, this is from an outsider view, from what I was reading, from what I was seeing, from what I was listening, there were some states in the United States where the abortion laws are significantly more liberal than we've got in the United Kingdom. And I consider at this moment in time, in an imperfect fallen world, dealing with imperfect fallen people, a compromise of 24 weeks, after which you are not permitted an abortion, is a reasonable compromise. I think it could probably be a bit earlier, particularly seeing as technology is improving and fetal viability is now creeping back. you now have a 50-50 shot at fetal viability at 20 weeks. I think we had the earliest ever delivery a few weeks back. I think it was 18 or 17 weeks. I'd have to dig up the article. So as medical technology advances and fetal viability becomes earlier and earlier and earlier, I think we should have an abortion law, abortion legislation that follows that. So saying that you can abort a child, because I do believe it is a child, at 36 weeks of gestation, I think is wrong in absolutely every instance, because most pregnancies will come to fruition. You'll have birth at 36, 37, 38, 39 weeks. And because of period math, it's very unlikely that a woman will know exactly how many weeks pregnant she is. So that 36 weeks, that child could be 40 weeks and about to be born the following day. Equally, we look at this heartbreaking issue in Ohio where a 10-year-old has been raped. It's become a political football, which I think is awful. He says is about to use it as a political football, but this 10-year-old is raped, and you're left with this awful decision, because I've got 2 children of my own. My son is 9, my daughter is 7. I wouldn't trust a 10-year-old to look after them, and they're 7 and 9. I certainly wouldn't trust a 10-year-old to have looked after my kids when they were newborn. So one way or another, that 10-year-old or that child, if you want to call it that, growing in her uterus, one of them is going to have their life destroyed. It's a question of whom. So my views on abortion, as limited as we can make it, there is a time limit to it. There are instances where it should be permitted, and those are heartbreaking. But I've also got to work through this, and this upsets people as well. I don't own a uterus. That's not the bit that upsets people. But I will never be in that position, and I don't think I've got the empathy to ever put myself into that position. So I am wary of deliberately imposing my view onto a national legislature. So abortion should be allowed in some circumstances. It should be tightly regulated and tightly controlled. That is my view.
To kind of address the point that you just made there, I've heard a lot of people make those kind of comments that men shouldn't be having discussions on abortions because they don't have a uterus, so they can't, make those decisions. I for one am firmly against that, because the logic of the argument holds regardless of who makes the
I completely agree, JB. I'm simply saying that it's not as if I've made this comment. It's not as if I've made these thoughts without that also being in my head. So I'm still going to have a view, because I think it's impossible to not have a view on this. I think not having a view is abdicating responsibility. But I've got to keep in mind that anything I say, I have to be sensitive of the fact that I will never be in this position. So I have to be loving towards those who will be in that position rather than dismissive. And I do think that people who have been in the position and who are brave enough, who have the courage to speak out about this in public, we do need to listen to these people, because the mothers who have had terminations bring a perspective to the argument that men can't. So we do need to be listening to them. Whether that discludes, preempts, or precludes a certain group of people from discussing the argument, I don't think it does. But it does need to be said that our viewpoint is necessarily further from the issue than that of a 10-year-old pregnant teenager. Well, pregnant girl, not even a teenager.
So, discussing your theology earlier, you kind of said we were discussing an afterlife in the situation, and I kind of told you I had many different ways I wanted to go, but I decided to jump into the tweet. So, from your point of view, you know what? Let's couch that for a second, because I got a way of leading into that. So, you study biology.
I do.
At what point does human life begin?
Oh, what a question. Good man. That's not a biological question. That's a philosophical question. You can make the argument that a fertilized oocyte, a zygote, has the potential to become a human being. However, 1 in 3 pregnancies ends in miscarriage, and we never know which of these pregnancies will end in miscarriage. We don't understand miscarriage very well. It's an area where there's woefully short of funding. Conception, there is not real debate. Cheers, Stephen. I'll shut up then.
There's this next one.
Where was I? Steve, see, I'm starting to go back on this Stephen's a great guy thing. I'm starting to go back on it. So we can take this point that is human life. And that zygote is definitely alive. But is it alive in any different or more meaningful way than the egg cell was before fertilization, than the sperm cell was before fertilization? And we lose those in one way or another. We lose those cells and they die quite regularly, and we don't seem to be particularly bothered about that. You could argue that it is for mammals at implantation, which happens after conception and a number of days or even a week after, when the blastula inserts into the uterine membrane. But again, you then got some complicated technical issues about what happens if a mother is drinking, doesn't know she's pregnant, then has a miscarriage. Can that mother be held culpable for that? I don't know. I think Stephen is definitely right that life starts at conception. But if that is human, I would defer on that one. I wouldn't say that life is human, because humans have a number of qualities that a fertilized diploid zygote doesn't have.
So let's see if we can simplify this a little bit or make it more complicated.
We won't know until we try.
What, in your expert
I'm
opinion,
not an expert, but let's go anyway.
What would be the definition of life?
Oh, we don't have one. We don't have one. There is no biologically agreed definition of life. I teach my students at school that life affirms to something called Mrs. Gren. Life is stuff that moves, reproduces, consents, grows, respires, excretes, and seeks nutrition. But that doesn't really encompass things like viruses, and viruses have wrought pretty much havoc over the last few years. There is no absolute biological definition for what life is, just as there's no absolute biological definition for what a species is. Biology is by definition squidgy. It's applied chemistry, and once you get chemistry out of test tubes and glass bottles, it becomes more difficult because you've got so many different things interacting. I think Mrs. Gren is a decent start. I think something that can do all of those things is a decent start. But even if I move further back from than viruses, what about an immotile alga? So something that doesn't move. It just sits on the seabed, sits there, photosynthesizes, does everything else, but it doesn't move. Is that alive? What about organisms that don't sense their environment? They just randomly knock into things and those things are automatically absorbed. Are they alive? With the human life, I'd want to say that these organisms can do all of those things independently, but then we get into difficult philosophical ideas of what about people on life support? Does that mean that they're not human? So it's an incredibly thorny, difficult issue. And the more you pick at it, the more questions you ask of it, the more difficult it gets. It's like zooming in on a coastline. If a top-down view, you think you know what the coastline of your country looks like, but then you zoom in and suddenly it's a little bit bigger because you can see more squiggles. Then you zoom in a bit more and you can see a bit more squiggles. So I see the attraction of wanting to say life is this, it starts at this, it ends at this, but that doesn't reflect the biology. Is a seed alive? There's a great podcast we have over here with a guy called Professor Brian Cox and Robin Ince called The Infinite Monkey Cage, and they have a recurring gag on there about if a strawberry is alive, when is a strawberry dead? And that encapsulates the problem that we've got here. Because we can't define life very, very tightly, we therefore can't define when it starts and we can't define when it ends. And both of those things have huge ethical implications for our end of life care and for our start of life care.
So I've heard it used many times in a debate, and I've heard arguments against it and arguments for it. I don't think I've ever used it. I know I've been tempted to. So could you break down possibly what some differences are between, let's say, a day one, gosh, I'm losing the word, not fertilized, implanted?
Yeah, so an implanted blastula.
So let's say a day one, day two implanted egg versus a cancer cell. What's the difference between the life that these two are?
There's a lot of similarities. So if we look at cancer cells are invasive. They grow rapidly. They are shielded necessarily for it to become cancer. They're shielded from the maternal immune system. They are angiogenic. They draw blood cells to them. This is a big misconception that people have about the placenta. So my wife had a home birth, and we were sent all these weird flyers with what to do with the placenta, because some people turn it into smoothies, some people turn it into pills. We even had one really weird flyer for a home sous chef to come and fry it up with onions. The placenta is made by the fertilized zygote. So no part of that tissue is the mother's. And that is, so even if you have a look at the blastula, you're not at that point sure which of those cells remains as a fetus and which of those cells go on to become the placenta. And the placenta only lives for 120 days. It's the shortest lived human organ, and it necessarily dies. So you can't pick out what the cells are doing. Cancer is that argument, as you've rightly said, because you haven't used it and you've noticed, it is a bad faith argument. Because, and I to my shame, I have used it myself in anger. It's bad faith.
I may have used it in a discussion with Stephen, but Stephen and I have all kinds of like conversations where we literally just throw everything. Well,
you know my opinion on Stephen. I'm holding judgment. I think it's a really bad faith argument, because a cancerous cell, provided it survives, can only wreak havoc, destruction, and eventually death. Whereas a fertilized, a diploid zygote will, all other things going its way, provide a new life. And that's incredible, and that's wonderful, and that's miraculous. And the stages it has to go through in order to become a human baby is stunning and absolutely awesome. I strongly recommend people look into it. There's a lot of good popular science stuff out on it. So there's the waters do get muddy. Not only will a cancer cell, like a embryo, draw blood vessels to it, not only will a cancer cell, like a embryo, grow in a way that the immune system can't defend. Certain cancers will differentiate. So the cells become different cells. So we're not a monolith of cells. There's about 200 different cell types in the body, and there are innumerable subtypes, and each of those does its own little job using the same DNA code. But they specialize. So the cells in my eyes are different from the cells in my stomach, which is really good, because otherwise I'd cry acid, and I don't want to do that. Now, you see some teratogenic cancers that differentiate, and they can be horrifying. So some cancers can end up with teeth. because they're building from the same DNA sequences. So they've got the gene codes in there to make teeth. So you can't just say, oh, an embryo develops, whereas a cancer cell doesn't. They can. And you can't necessarily say that a cancer is always wrong. So most human cytology work is done with something called HeLa cells. HeLa cells are from a woman who lived in the 1970s called Henrietta Lacks. And she died of cancer. We're still using her cells. They can be grown in perpetuity in Petri dishes. I suppose the absolute demarcation is that a cancer cell can never become a full human. An embryonic cell can become a full human. That pluripotent stem cell can become an entire human, given the correct signaling. Whereas a cancer cell, even given the correct signaling, will never become that.
All right, now to get to the difficult stuff.
that was the easy stuff, was it? Oh crap.
So you're a Christian. I'm sure you believe in. I'm sure you. Yeah. I go by what people self-identify as.
I self-identify as a Christian. Yes.
So, what's your? I'm going to assume you believe in souls and an afterlife. We've already had a small discussion about an afterlife.
We have.
You have said that the afterlife is pretty much what you want, based on your desires.
I don't think it's what you want. I think that you are given over to selfish wants, provided you haven't accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, because Jesus is the salvation. That I'm incredibly orthodox on. The only way to salvation and through to God, the only way that we know God, the only way that we've been able to see the incarnation of God is through Christ and his redeeming work on the cross. He died. I believe he died for my sins, which is a mind-blowing concept. And he hung on that cross and he said, it is finished. He took all of the sin, past, present, and future, on his shoulders, descended into hell, defeated death. And it is by my affirmation of that and my trust in Christ that I am redeemed. I have my debt paid. I am saved from being given over to my own selfish, corrupting desires.
So you just said something in there that I'm going to use against you, but I'm going to do it in a nice way.
Go for it.
You said the only way to salvation is through Jesus and acceptance of Jesus.
Yep.
So what happens to an aborted fetus? They're all doomed for hell?
Oh, it's a horrible question, isn't it? It's an extension of the question: what happens to that person in a uncontacted tribe in the middle of the Amazon? Are they doomed to hell? What of the people who lived in communist China, when it was a real communist state rather than just a capitalist state with a communist regime? That they couldn't find out about God. So are you putting all those billions into hell? And the truth is, JB, I don't know.
Okay,
I don't
that's
know.
fine. I can't
I need to have that humility to go, I don't have that answer. But you're absolutely right. If my theology, if my understanding of theology is perfect, which it won't be, but if it was, that statement of the only way to salvation is through Jesus Christ necessarily means that your statement of fetuses will end up in eternal conscious torment, or whatever it is people believe, in hell, has to be true. But that only holds true provided that I know absolutely everything and my theology is complete and perfect, which it isn't. I am still learning. I've been a Christian for 6.5 years. People like Augustine didn't get all of this sorted out. People like Thomas Aquinas didn't have all of this stuff sorted out, and they studied this for their entire lives and made careers out of it. I am not good enough to make a career of it. I'm barely good enough to make a teaching career. So absolutely, it's a horrible, horrible concept.
I'm surprised he hasn't typed it yet. But Spartan has an answer for you if you want to know how it works. It's called universalism.
Stop prodding. Stop prodding. I haven't given enough thought consideration to the universalism debate. I've seen it's been sparking up on my timeline, and that there's a lot of very strongly held views on both sides. And I've been observing and asking questions and dropping in the odd GIF, taking my lead from you, just to try and see what this is. But I think there's a tendency amongst most of my friends, all of my family, and a lot of my students to say to me, give me a question, and I'll go, I don't know. And then they go back to, you're a science teacher, why don't you know this? So there's this temptation to believe that because of one's worldview, one should know all of the answers. Just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean I have a coherent theology. Doesn't mean that I have thought about universalism versus whatever the opposite is. I don't even know what the opposite is. I'm sure Spartan theology is already furiously typing in caps locks.
He said he's holding back.
I don't know about millennialism versus premillennialism. Well then, ST. I don't know about all of those things, and I want to learn about all of those things, and I'm going to. The Bible is Jewish meditation literature. It's meant to be looked at over a lifetime. I would be arrogant in the extreme to say, right, baptized, time to fix all of these arguments that Christians have been having and having schisms over for 1600 years. So I'm happy to be corrected. Sometimes I take it better than others, but I should always try to be happy to be corrected.
To promote my own stuff, I have actually have a video on my channel where I went over universalism with John DePew from Apocalypse Here. Lauren Robinson's husband from the New Testament Review podcast. So you can check that out if you want.
I'll check it out. I'll take some notes. I'll leave you something pleasant in the comments. First.
Yeah, it was rather interesting. I had some questions that I had were kind of answered to it and kind of made more sense once he kind of pointed them out. So I thought it was a really good discussion.
And this is the beauty of Twitter. We get into these flame wars occasionally, and we see some very uncharitable takes. But we are living in an era, we're living in an age where we can access people like this, and we can have conversations about theology as just regular guys. That isn't something that the church as a monolith has controlled access to theology for, well, right up to until the Enlightenment. So it's an incredible double-edged sword that Twitter is. On the one hand, you can talk to people about, I don't understand what this is, I don't know, help. On the other hand, you make a slightly wrong statement and the pile-on is biblical. In fact, I've got a colleague who reckons that the most effective way to get to get help on the internet is to make a question, go in another account and answer it wrongly, and then everybody else will pile on telling you what you need to do, because people don't like helping, but they love correcting.
Yeah, that's why I keep all these crazy people like Spartan Theology and Stephen Steen around. None of them want to help me. None of them want to help me become a Christian. They just want to correct me and tell me that I'm wrong.
You're wrong because.
So we've covered that life starts at conception. We've covered that all aborted fetuses go to hell for eternity. We've covered you're a heretic. We've covered that you're not even a smart biologist. So I guess, how do you feel about philosophy?
I'm a trained biologist. I'm not a smart biologist, but I am a trained biologist. So when I went in for my master's, it was a very, very alien place. I've never thought that science and religion have been diametrically opposed. I've never thought that they've been at war. But it wasn't until I took this, it's a master's in aspects and implications of biblical interpretation. So I suppose I can loosely describe it as philosophy. I had to read Kant, and I had to read Descartes, and I had to read all of these philosophers, learn about deconstructionism and all this. It wasn't until I did that I realized these two spheres of life have completely different languages. They use words completely differently. They use burdens of proof completely differently. And a lot of the time, the more scientific a person is, the more likely they are to talk across somebody who is philosophical, simply because they do not regard philosophical proofs, evidence, arguments as sufficient or even necessary to confirm or deny a hypothesis. As disparaging as I am, I'm used to succeeding. So I got a first class degree from Cardiff University, which at the time was like 12th in the country. I'm used to doing very, very well. So that would be something like a 4.0 grade average. And it's not bad. The first essay I got back on this master's, I got like 20 odd %. And that was very, very difficult for me to take. And I very nearly dropped out there and then, thinking philosophy is dumb because I can't do it. What I think philosophy is very, very good at is bringing in a little bit of humility to any discussion. People have been arguing about the big questions for 10,000 years. There's no such thing as a wrong argument. There's no such thing as an incorrect argument. It is more or less helpful arguments. And that's something that doesn't really fly in the scientific community. You need to have empirical data that supports or does not support, not this mush in the middle. So I think philosophy is an absolutely vital way that we understand the world. That there is this Christian idea that Christianity should eschew philosophy, that it is of the world and we are not, and we should only take on the biblical idea of the inerrant word of God. But that then ignores the Greek philosophy that is all the way through the New Testament. That ignores mind-body dualism. It ignores the fact that the Bible is historically, geographically, culturally located in time. You need to have an understanding of what the philosophy of the nomadic Hebrews was to understand the woe that they felt during the exile period. And if you don't understand that philosophy, the Bible is poorer for it. You need to understand the philosophical viewpoint that accompanied the title Messiah to understand why, when Jesus was arrested, the apostles drew their swords and attempted to fight. They thought that Jesus was coming as a conquering king. They had no idea about this wider mission that Jesus was on. So philosophy, the more you read philosophy, the better you will understand the Bible. Does that mean there are bad philosophical takes, in my opinion? Absolutely. I think there's some stuff that is very bad faith. I think there's stuff that doesn't take into account complexity, but you can make exactly the same comment of a scientific statement or of a religious statement. I think that is a problem with a limited human brain. And we've already discussed that my brain is more limited than most.
Sorry, I have something going on in the background.
No worries.
So I guess what I wanted to ask you just about this philosophy angle is, what do you think about the person or human life personhood arguments that are used in abortion cases?
I think it's problematic. I think it's very, very problematic. Personhood, You can make some really stupid arguments with personhood, and I'm not trying to ridicule the personhood argument. I'm saying that it can be used in bad faith very easily, which is usually the sign of a flawed argument, in my opinion. So, is a pregnant woman allowed to use a carpool lane?
I mean, it depends. I mean, there's actually somebody that's suing in Texas over that.
Fantastic. Well done. Power to the people. Is a pregnant person entitled to child tax benefits? If a pregnant person has a miscarriage, are they now guilty of manslaughter? Is that person in utero entitled to arm themselves? Are they entitled to get an ID? Are they entitled to apply for a loan? There's a lot of bad faith arguments that can be put out there, and I think it is problematic. I listed a few of my concerns around personhood in a very, very long Twitter thread that is probably lost to the depths of time. But I can you deport a Mexican, nothing wrong with Mexican people, a Mexican pregnant woman who got pregnant during her holiday on American soil? Because you can't deport a naturalized American citizen. And if that person has if the fetus has personhood from the moment of conception and they were conceived on American soil, they must therefore be an American citizen. So you cannot deport the pregnant mother. That's where I think the personhood argument breaks down. We don't behave as if an embryo is a person. That's not to strip an embryo of all of the rights, of all of the respect that a potential human life should have. But again, I made the classic, and again, it's an argument that is made in bad faith, and I've used it in anger a number of times. If there is an IVF clinic burning down, and you have a baby in one room, and you have 10 embryos in another, and you only have time to save one of them, which are you going to save? And our emotional response, and it is an emotional response, is to save that baby, which I think undermines the idea that an embryo is a person. People are going to disagree with me, and that's absolutely fine. I don't think it is an argument that we should rest the abortion case on.
So you've already said, so I guess I'm trying to think on how to say this, because you seem to be somebody that is pro the choice but against the decision.
Yeah, it's horrible. Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really good description of where I am, JB. I think that's a very, very thoughtful, and you've clearly listened to everything that I've said. I am pro-choice against decision. I would love a world with no abortion. I would absolutely love a world with no abortion. But I think that in limited, strictly controlled, time-sensitive points, abortion should be permitted. And let's be clear about this. With a few exceptions, that is what a lot of the red states are bringing in. They're bringing in, they're not banning abortion outright at this moment in time. That may change. We don't know how state legislatures are going to change. We don't know whether weirdly Dobbs makes this more polarized than less polarized. I think we've got a case here of the dog has been chasing the car and has finally caught it. And I don't know that state legislatures were actually prepared for this victory.
They weren't. They're states that are reverting back to laws from the 1800s because they've got nothing on the books.
Exactly. It's absolute chaos And I don't mean that disparagingly. I genuinely think that the legislatures were caught by surprise until the leak came out. I think there's a lot of questions need to be answered over if these Republican-held legislatures were pretty certain that Dobbs was going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Was it 6-7 weeks out from the actual decision? Why weren't they paving the ground? Why weren't they starting to prep things? I know it takes a long time to bring a bill through, but it seemed that they didn't even start. And by one count, only like 3 or 4 words in the final opinion compared to the original opinion changed. So
I've also one of the issues that I have with the kind of decision is they talk about how the Supreme Court's supposed to be not based on politics, but based on the Constitution and the rule of law. But like you actually had, I believe it was John Roberts actually wrote, like, we need this decision to be 5-4 instead of 6-3 so that we don't shock the American citizens. Like, you're literally writing that your decision needs to be political.
And that was then made worse by, was it Alito who gave a conferring but separate decision that taking aim at other very closely held American sentiments, and it just poured political fuel on the fire. I sit back and I look at, from afar, I look at the Supreme Court and I look at the people on the left who are going, the Supreme Court has become overtly political. This is awful. We've got to stuff the Supreme Court, expand the Supreme Court, get some retirees in, XYZ. And then you've got people on the right going, no, it's absolutely non-partisan. This is just good law and good sense. And as with so many things, this is what deconstructionism is with Sartre. It's grey. It's in the middle. It's not one end or the other. I don't think that the court is political. But if you believe that you can take your political, religious, your sociological views out of your decision-making entirely, then you're wrong. That's what hermeneutics is all about. We are conditioned by the era we grow up in, the education that we have, by the people we hang around with, by our communities, by our religions. And this affects not only the answers we find satisfactory, but even the questions we ask of different texts. So you can't have a completely non-biased view on these documents. I do think that the law, the actual Dobbs decision, sending it back to the states, I don't think that's partisan. I think had they gone partisan, they would have pushed a little bit further and say that rather than abortion is not protected in the Constitution, the Supreme Court could have gone, abortion is unconstitutional. That would have been incredibly partisan. The problem that we've got is that we're at a very, very fractured time, and I don't know the difference, that there's Congress and Senate, but your political system, and ours is mirroring it-ish.
Senate is part broken. Of the Congress. Congress would be right. Senate in the House.
Okay. So I haven't seen the Senate pass a law of any consequence. I was 35 on Tuesday. I haven't seen it happen in my working memory.
Well, I've gone on record on many occasions, and I've put this in private conversations with Stephen, and I've put this on Twitter so like anybody can find it. I'm a firm believer that the entire United States Constitution needs to be shredded and rewritten from the ground up. Like we're living by a document that was written by racist bigots who hated everybody that wasn't like them and believed rich white men were the only people that should make decisions in this country.
Like Twitter, if you could just pay attention, you thought I was controversial, right? This guy. Well, no, this is the issue, and this is where hermeneutics comes in, and you've got 200 years of trying to make the modern world fit with this ancient document, and it necessarily it necessarily means that there are incongruities in there, that bits don't work, that you've got stuff that is no longer fit for purpose. The Second Amendment, for example, that this rights to bear arms as part of a well-regulated militia. Militias aren't a thing anymore. So is the Second Amendment still fit for purpose? I absolutely agree. You've got a system at the moment that is archaic, but I'm sat in a parliamentary democracy that doesn't even have a written constitution. I am in no position to criticize. At least you've got a document. We go through convention and, oh, he said, she said, and don't upset the Queen. That's the general constitution. Do not put the Queen in a difficult position. Our last constitutional crisis was brought about by our Prime Minister proroguing Parliament, which is, proroguing is where the Queen dissolves Parliament before an election. And the Prime Minister, in order to avoid scrutiny of a certain piece of legislation, once legislation is started, it's much more difficult to stop. So wanted to avoid this scrutiny, told the Queen, can you prorogue Parliament? We're going to have an election. Or can you prorogue Parliament? We're going to have our recess. Can you prorogue Parliament? We're going to come to the end of this parliamentary term. And it was a constitutional crisis because it made the Queen look political. We can't say this is a constitutional crisis because it is in contravention of this line of the Third Amendment, or it's in contravention of this part of the Constitution. So in that respect, you're actually one up on us. But
the scoreboard's 1-0. I mean, we won,
but
you lost. I mean,
if we're gonna get onto that, when was the last war that you won without British help? # just saying.
Wait a minute. You mean like whenever we came in to save y'all in World War II?
You mean after we held off the I nearly said a bad word online. Well, we held off the evils of the Axis single-handedly until you decided to get involved.
Weren't y'all hiding underground in tubes?
Absolutely, but we were doing it with a stiff upper lip and a good cup of tea.
So just to summarize your points in the most uncharitable way possible.
Absolutely.
You're pro-abortion. You, as a biologist, you have no idea when human life begins.
Correct.
You believe aborted fetuses burn in hell for eternity.
As they should.
You dislike the Queen.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay.
I'm actually a massive fan of the Queen. The rest of them, Muppets, but the Queen's all right.
None of that's true, by the way.
No. Well, depends. Certain areas of Twitter, that is all true.
And in broadcast. I've got a hard out in about 10 minutes. Does anybody have any questions in the chat? I think we've got Spartan left. That's about it. Does he think the Queen is actually still alive?
Ooh, good question. She was seen in public 2 weeks ago at a surprise opening, so I'm going to go with yes for now.
Well, first of all, you have to understand what alive means, which we've already established.
I'm taking alive in can still be seen on camera. Because for celebrities, that's all that matters anyway.
In that case, Elvis is still alive.
Elvis is alive. He didn't die. He just went home.
So is Michael Jackson.
Oh, now we're going to start at a whole different part of the internet, the dark web.
So to kind of tie into something like we touched on, and it's something that I've seen Spartan bring up in numerous conversations as far as like personhood of a fetus. So when do you believe in your theological view, to the best of your understanding, because I realize you don't have it all, you don't have perfect understanding of it, there is an implantation of a soul into a body.
Yeah. I argue that the soul is implanted when the baby could survive by itself. Shortly before then, it's weirdly enough, it's not something the church fathers talked about. It's not something the Bible thought about, because pregnancy was measured by when you had the quickening, when you could feel the baby kicking. So it's difficult to apply an ancient Near Eastern Hebrew text to a modern understanding of medicine. And I think this is where the controversy around abortion ultimately comes from. We are trying to apply it, in all cases, in the best faith, in the best way possible. We're trying to apply our understanding that is communicated to us through these words on a page from a world that doesn't exist anymore into a miraculous world where we can do heart transplants, where we can artificially make a fetus, where we can deliver a fetus at 19 weeks and it can survive with huge help from elsewhere. I think that is where I would be comfortable, because the flip side, if we believe that God is sovereign, and therefore that everybody that lives and dies is at the very least doing so on God's acquiescence, if not God's divine will, that's a lot of souls that are spontaneously aborted through miscarriage. And as miscarriage is such a feature, it's not a bug, it's a feature of pregnancy. It's an alarmingly high feature of pregnancy, and it's not taught enough in our schools. We don't prepare women for this devastation that will likely come their way. If we're losing so many and there is a soul embedded in the cell, there's a lot of souls that never got the chance to meet Jesus. That makes me uncomfortable. Yeah, ST, it's a mind-blowing thing. And this is why, again, my views are in flux, because as medical technology improves and we can give these earlier and earlier fetuses a shot at life, I do believe that the law should come back and protect them. But as I say, this is in my muddled, imperfect theology that I'm certain I'm going to get corrected on in the depths of Twitter later on.
Just to kind of talk about that for a second. I'm not sure exactly, and he's mentioned this on Twitter and stuff. So and he just put it in the chat actually. So I mean, it's not anything that he's like ran from. The reason I asked about this, as far as the implantation of a soul and stuff, is because Spartan has argued on numerous times with people about he has twins. So he's like, great. So you're telling me that did they share a soul? Was a second soul put in once the egg divided? What, exactly how did that work? And like you just put in there, the 19 weeks thing blows his mind, because he had two kids that were in the NICU center for a while after they were born. They were born.
They would be, and that's absolutely fantastic. I mean, that's incredible that they're here, that they're healthy. But he hits on a really important thing. If we take I'm not using this term disparagingly, if we take a simplistic view of the sperm meets egg, fertilization, imbued with soul, at that point, what happens if the zygote splits and becomes identical twins? What happens if it becomes triplets? What happens if it splits before implantation? What happens if because it's very, very rare, but you can have identical twins that share an amniotic sac and a placenta. They're usually born very, very early, but that blastula would have divided much, much later. So you're in biologically difficult territory, and the church has shown its ability to take new scientific findings and use that as a lens to reappreciate scripture through. We no longer put the earth at the center of the universe. We haven't thought that the earth was flat since the Greeks. We have the Catholic Church, and I know this is going to offend a lot of my evangelical brothers and sisters, but the Catholic Church affirms evolution. We have come to a point where we can accept these new findings, and simplistically straw manning what the science actually is does not support your theology.
And I think that's going to be a great point to end it on.
Fantastic.
That was a fantastic little ending sentence. So since we don't really have any questions, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm gonna get you to stick around for a minute. We'll talk backstage for a little bit before we head
Cool.
off. But that's gonna be all. Y'all have a good day.
Thanks for inviting me on. Thanks for letting me talk about a little bit of what I believe, and I'm happy to debate this on Twitter. It's the summer holiday now, so I don't have to stop to go to work.
They're coming for you. Don't worry.
Oh, they are coming. So I shall tweet in the shade.